said, we're going to jump right in and going to share my screen here. Can everybody see this okay? Yeah, awesome. So we are learning a piece of text from Arachin, which is a later part of the Talmud. That sort of final portion, we were talking about this a bit last week, about the different orders of the Talmud. And actually, I'm going to change my mind here about what I'm going to share. I'm going to share this. So can everybody see this okay from Safaria? Awesome. So in the Mishnah, I guess it's also in the Talmud, there are 6 orders, and the last order is Toharot, which is all about purity. So this is more about ritual purity. This has to do with temple stuff, things like that. Oh, that's what I thought it was. Oh no, it's right here. Arifin. Sorry, I thought it was in that. But even still, Kodshim, the 5th order, is about sacrifices, they're interrelated. And we're going to learn from Arachin, which is about temple practice. We're in the book of Bamidbar, so that makes a ton of sense. And interestingly enough, for what we're going to learn today is a little bit about the role of music and song in the temple. And unfortunately, this sugya, the section of Talmud, sort of peters itself out. It doesn't end with a wonderful conclusion. But I think the questions it asks, the sort of core ideas are really, really central and essential. And as we think about what does prayer and offerings and how services and sacrifices are in alignment, how these things sort of all fit together. So before we dig in, does anybody have any questions, thoughts, sermons, counter sermons? Okay, cool. Can I get a volunteer to start off here with our Braita here? Tanu Rabbanan.
Yeah, I'll read.
Wonderful, thank you.
The sages taught in Barak the song that the Levites sing while a communal offering is being sacrificed is an indispensable component of the offering, which means if the Levites did not sing, the offering is invalid. This is the statement of Rabbi Meir, and the rabbis say it is not indispensable.
Wonderful, thank you. Wait, before we go on, so I want to highlight an important piece of this. So first of all, it says Tanu Rabbanan here at the beginning, which the text is translated as the sages taught. But we know, because we've talked about it before, but we're going to remind ourselves anyway, is that this introduction of Tanu is the introduction of a Baraita, which means, which again is in the translation here, which means it's from the early period of the rabbis who did overlap with the temple. The second thing we know is that we have names here, Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim, Rabbi Meir and the rabbis, which means to tell us that Rabbi Meir and the rabbis are in opposition. The rabbis, when it says the sages or the rabbis, it's telling us that's the majority opinion. And here we're getting the minority opinion of Rabbi Meir first. Now, this is really interesting. The Mishnah, when it is unattributed, right? So when the Mishnah just says something, the conventional understanding in the Talmud and in the Mishnah is that is the opinion of Rabbi Meir. That Rabbi Meir is so authoritative that he is the anonymous voice of the Mishnah. So for him and the sages to be disagreement is really, really interesting. It sort of raises the stakes of the debate. So that's the sort of context I want to set in terms of the kind of disagreement that we're having. The second thing I want to point out is the language of indispensable. Now, it's not a direct translation. But it has the same meaning. So we're going to look at the words step by step in the Hebrew, even though we already know what it means in English. And I don't think the translation is wrong, but I want to sort of like really, really zero in. So it says, Tanu Rabbanan, the sage is taught in a Braita, Hashir, song, the role of singing, Me'akev, et ha-korban. So et is the directive preposition, and ha-korban means the sacrifice, the offering. Me'akev is the verb here. It's the thing that is being translated as an indispensable component. But what it actually translates to is prevents. So song, or in our case, like the lack of a song, prevents the korban from being acceptable. Meaning to say, song is indispensable. That's how they get to that translation. Does everybody understand what I'm saying here? Right? And so when it says, and then these are the words of Rabbi Meir, the sages say, Eino me'akev. No, the lack of the song is not preventative. It doesn't stop the sacrifice from going forward. So it's a weird, funny sort of negatives, double negatives, hidden negatives in the sentence. But the core thing is this: the song is indispensable, and the lack of a song, depending on who you believe, have a different opinion about dispensable. So Rabbi Meir says we have to have it, and rabbis say we don't have to have it. So before we read anything else, what do people think about this dichotomy? Could you imagine services without song? I know it's not really a one-to-one, but that's what it draws out in me. What do people think? Yeah, Bob.
Our own song almost. So just singing that. No. So yeah, the two, singing and services go together. That's all I can say.
Got it. Yeah, I missed the first part, but I got the end there. Right. For you agree with Rabbi Meir, right? The idea of that song on some level is indispensable, makes sense, right? And certainly the way we do Judaism now mirrors that worldview.
The problem is, and I know I'm jumping ahead, is it says that sprinkling the blood is just as important.
Well, we haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah, I said we haven't gotten there yet, but if they say that, then the whole service is irrelevant, immaterial, whether we sing or not.
Yeah, well, let's come back to that. Which is asking the question, what other things are indispensable? Yeah, Bob, I see you.
So when I go to Minyan, or the early part of services on Saturday, everything goes so fast, there's no song. So there's a lot of prayer that goes on without any song, and I have a most difficult time just keeping up. And if they would slow down and sing, I would be more comfortable. But there's a lot of prayer that goes on without song.
Yeah, right. So again, we're sort of like anachronistically applying this song principle to our prayer service as distinct from the temple service that it's describing, right? But even for us, right, like, is song indispensable, right? For us, we can say on a halakhic level, if I've just recited it, I might have done it. But as Bob, you're putting out there, it actually quite a serious impact on the experience. Does it really do the job? Now, again, we're sort of living in two worlds where we're really the Gemara is talking about sacrifices, and it's not talking about the Amidah and the prayer services. So we're sort of like bending the rules here. But I think this is a good question for us to ask. Yeah, Ron, I see you on mute.
I was going to say that even if you're just saying it because you're having trouble keeping up, there's still some nusach to it. I mean, I know when I read it even by myself, I have a little bit of a nusach behind there. And to me, that's the singing.
Okay, right.
But we don't do Torah without nusach, and we don't do Haftorah without nusach. We do it in plenty of places.
Right. So you're saying two things. One is even when we recite things to ourselves, that recitation has a musicality to it and therefore may be considered like song. The second thing you're saying is that there are lots of things in our tradition that now we have applied musicality to, like reading Torah or reading the Megillot or things like that, which are an essential quality, at least certainly to us. Yeah, Karen.
So I'm thinking when they did the communal or the sacrifices, the people, the Levites knew what was going on. The people observing it probably really didn't know what was going on. And the only way of them connecting was the song. So if they were just, like Bob said, if they're just mumbling words, the people there have no connection to, no emotional connection to what's going on.
Right, meaning to say, even if we place ourselves into the temple service context and say, this is happening in public, and the fact that it's happening in public, there is a pomp and circumstance to it that helps clarify the experience to observers. Right, did I get what you said?
Yes.
More or less, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, right, so meaning to say, it's not just perhaps a box to check, but a context that singing helps provide understanding in ways that we might have not have done. Okay, so again,
Well,
we're
the singing also provides the punctuation.
for sure, right? We it's even called a sof pasuk, right? The end of a verse. The trope we use when we read Torah tells us that it's the end of a verse, right? For sure, it gives us it tells us that's a piece. Second, different services have different tones to them. So they have a different, we understand the themes behind it. High holidays doesn't sound like Purim, as an example.
Right.
So I want to say one other thing. I want to pause, and I want to read ahead, and then we can come back to it, because I set you up unfairly, which is our text is about the temple practice, and I asked you questions about prayer services. So I want to just name, right, that I've already set us off on sort of the wrong direction, but I want us to keep it in mind because I still think it's important. So let's read ahead, and I'd love a volunteer to read for us, but even before we do that, I want to just unpack these technical terms. But the first thing that happens, we know it says, my tama, what is the reasoning of the words of Rebbe Meir? So we already know we're going to get, this is a question that we're going to get an answer for, and it says, de amar kra. So it tells us two things, just those two words. One is the fact that it starts with a dalid tells us that this is in Aramaic, because dalid is the word asher or sh, that means that or because. So we already know we're at a different time period in the answer of the question, even just from those first few words, because the Rabbi Meir didn't speak Aramaic, he only spoke Hebrew. So we already know we're in an Amoraic era. We're already a few hundred years later, trying to understand what Rebbe Meir and the sages were debating about. The second thing is it says kra. That is the same root as mikra, as scripture. And so we know that we're going to get a verse. So we even just from those 6 words, what is the reason of Rebbe Meir? It's because of a verse. And we haven't even read the verse yet, but we just know from those technical terms that's what we're going to get. And I think it's useful for us to sort of anticipate, to see, oh, I hear these sounds, I hear these words, I know what they're going to tell us. The last thing I want to say, in terms of the technical terms, is this construction here, ma'af, which means just as, so too. And you can see it down here. I know we haven't read it yet. Just as, so too. This means that just from reading these couple of words, we know that we're going to get a question, an answer, which is a verse, and then some sort of application from one context to another. Just as something is true here, it will be true there. So that is, again, without having read the paragraph yet, we already know, we already have like a template, like an outline of what we're about to get. Okay, with that in mind, can I get a volunteer to read what the Gemara asks?
All right, I will.
Please.
Okay, the Gemara asks, what is the reasoning of Rabbi Meir? That is, from where does he derive his opinion? The Gemara asks, it is as the verse states, and I have given the Levites, they are given to Aaron and to his sons from among the children of Israel. to do the service of the children of Israel in the tent of meeting, and to make atonement for the children of Israel. The verse compares the atonement for the Jewish people, which is caused by the sprinkling of the blood of offerings on the altar, to the service of the Levites, which is their singing. This teaches that just as the atonement caused by the sprinkling of the blood is an indispensable component of the offering, so too the song of the Levites is indispensable.
Great. Okay, so a couple of things are happening here all at once. Right. So first is we're getting the reasoning of Rabbi Meir from the Amoraim, and we're getting an answer from the verse. And the verse is from this week's Parsha, and it tells us, right, sort of. Yes, Rena, I hear you. It tells us a little bit about what the role of Aaron and his family, the role of the Levites and the priests have in the tabernacle and the giving of offerings. And so it says, I've given the Levites, they are given to Aaron and his sons from among the children of Israel to do the service of the children of Israel in the tent of meeting and to make atonement for the children of Israel. What Rabbi Meir, at least the Amoraim, are applying to Rabbi Meir is that the essential quality, to do the service, refers first, right, that atonement is done through sprinkling, and because sprinkling the blood is indispensable, the song of the Levites is also indispensable, right? So we might say that's because the Levites are mentioned. It could be that it says, and to make atonement. There's a lot of sort of hints to this over in the verse, but I think arguably nothing particularly specific, right? It doesn't say, and song, atonement, and sprinkling is required, right? It doesn't say that. So we're already in sort of a level of interpretation. So again, what they're applying to Rabbi Meir is this idea that, oh, this verse has to do with atonement, and since atonement is done through blood sprinkling, I know the gruesome details of the sacrifices, just as that is essential, so too is song essential. And here we can see it as well. Just as me'akevet, just as kapara, this atonement prevents the sacrifices from being applicable, so too song stops, the lack of song stops from it being applicable. Do people think that this is a strong argument? I think it's a pretty weak one, personally.
I'm going to go off the track again, like I usually do. But the Levites didn't just sing; they used instruments, and we no longer use the instruments because of the destruction of the temple. So, and we're no longer doing the sprinkling because we don't have the temple. So, what's the point of the singing?
Okay, a few things.
Today
one is you're right that when they say shira, and we're talking song, it is definitely broader than just music, song, right? With voices, there definitely had instruments in the temple. I don't believe that the reason we don't use instruments now is because of the temple. My understanding is that it's a concern about Shabbat more than it is about temple practice. But again, there's probably more than one argument for it. I'm not here to say that that's wrong. My understanding was concern about fixing. Okay. The third thing you said, which I think is really applicable here, which is there's a lot of these things that we're not doing now. Should we still feel like song is indispensable? Right. And I think there's an important sort of emotional versus an emotional versus sort of a halachic distinction that might be applicable here. Any other thoughts on this? No? Okay. All right, let's read a little bit further. Can I get another, yeah, Bob, can you read the next one for us?
The Gemara asks,
Yes, please.
The Gemara asks, and what do the rabbis derive from the comparison in this verse? The Gemara answers, that comparison serves to teach another halakha, which was stated by Rabbi Elazar. As Rabbi Elazar says, just as the atonement achieved by the sprinkling of the blood must take place during the day, so too the song must be sung during the day. Sounds like reading the Haggadah.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same guys. So here the rabbis, the Gemara does something important, which is we know that the rabbis, they want everyone to be able to use every verse, but you can only use it once. So if Rabbi Meir is using this verse to say that song is indispensable, it's interesting. We have to know, how are the rabbis using the same verse? Because if they're using it in the same way, we have to understand why. But they're not using it in the same way, we discover, right? They're using it to agree with Rabbi Elazar. And Rabbi Elazar is saying, no, this verse is used to say, just as that atonement through this sprinkling process is a daytime ritual, so too song is a daytime ritual. So they take a totally different approach to it. They say, no, it has to do with time of day. Again, and I would argue equally not specific in the verse. Or like the verse doesn't say daytime either. What do people think about this? Does someone feel like Rabbi Meir is more right, or Rabbi Elazar? Yeah, Karen, I see your face.
Well, Rabbi Meir is at least talking about, to me, again, like I said, connection. The daytime thing is more of a stretch to me.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? That I don't think I've ever had this idea that atonement is really only achieved during the day. Like that's already a pretty massive theological statement, right? Like, does that mean that Kol Nidre and Ne'ilah services are basically meaningless? Now, of course, no, we're not really saying that. But like, how does that play in? I'm not looking for someone to have a specific answer, just an interesting question that comes up for me.
I think the Karpa note all were during the day.
Yeah.
That's true.
Because there was a certain time frame that you had to do the eating afterwards, which means the sprinkling of the blood would have been during the day, but that has nothing to do with whether you couldn't sing at night.
Yeah, I think
singing can continue while you're eating.
Yeah, but I think when they say song,
in fact, when you get to the Hallel during the Haggadah, during the Seder, they specifically say that some of it should be done before and some of it after the meal, and after the meal would be after dark for sure.
Yeah, there's like basically two little Hallels in the Haggadah as an example. But I do think there's an important piece here, which is when it says song, according to Rabbi Elazar, I think they're still being specific to not any music or any song singing ever, but specifically the parts that were part of the rituals of sacrifices. Yes, Kol Nidre is before sunset, except when it isn't. Right. It may start before sunset, but it doesn't usually end there. Okay, but even still, right? I think this question, I think, even if we took song as a concept, we're sort of like beating around the edges of it here, which is what I think is so interesting. All right, let's read on a little bit ahead, which asks a good, important, sort of fundamental question, which is minayin, from where is it derived? So let's discover it. Can I get another volunteer or anyone who wants to read what Rav Yehuda has to say? I guess Rena wants to read it. All right, let's read it together, Rena. Rav Yehuda said that Shmuel said, from where is it derived that the basic requirement, and here the word is ikar, so maybe the essential requirement to accompany the communal offerings with song applies by Torah law, meaning to say how do we know that this song thing is part of Torah law versus rabbinic law? Again, we know because it's Rav Yehuda that we're in Babylonia, and this is Amoraic because the rabbis in Israel are called rabbis and not ravs. So, all right. So, how do we know that this is Torah law? As it is stated, Shene Emar, with regard to a Levite who serves in the temple, then he, the Levite, shall serve with the name of the Lord their God. Right, Deuteronomy.
All right, that verse from Deuteronomy, which I just looked up, it's totally out of context from what they're talking about. It has to do with a Levite that went from one settlement to another, whether he was allowed to participate.
Yes, well, it does become relevant a little bit later, but you're right. For the most part, it's out of context, which is to say, right, when they're moving from settlement to settlement in the book of Deuteronomy, and I'm going to unpack that in a second, right? They are talking about Levitical service. So that's how they're getting the connection. So what is the service? Like, how are we defining this question of service of God? You must say, I love that language. You must say that this refers to song in which the Levites mention and praise the name of God. So what is service? Service is song, and therefore it's obligatory or required. That's the argument being made here. Now let me pause for a second and talk about Deuteronomy versus Leviticus, for example. So according to the documentary hypothesis, which argues that there are multiple authors of the Torah that are all edited together, and even if you don't agree with that worldview, but you can at least notice the themes that show up differently in all the different books, the priestly author, right, or the tone of Leviticus is all about the Levites on various hilltops and various localities. The priests are sort of all over the place doing their work. The Deuteronomist, the voice in Deuteronomy, is very, very focused on centralization. What is happening in the temple? And so I mention this not because there's one answer or a wrong answer, but when we look at the context of Deuteronomy, they're talking about movement of priests. They have very different understandings of what that might look like. Now, I don't think that changes our understanding here, but it is worth noting. We'll read one more paragraph here, maybe two more, because I really want to get to the next one. And again, as I said, the rabbis sort of peter out. They don't really come to an answer. They sort of just like move on to other detours. The Gemara objects, but you can say, that this service with the name of God is referring to the lifting of hands for the priestly benediction, meaning to say, when it says that the priest will serve the name of God, right, we could refer to the priestly blessing, which we talked about, which was relevant last week, was in the Torah last week. So like that makes sense. Priestly blessing, that fits. Which also includes the mention of the name of God. And if that's the case, if so, this verse is referring to priests and not ordinary Levites, meaning to say the subset of Kohanim, as opposed to just the Levites as a whole. The Gemara responds, from the fact that it is written at the time the Lord separated the tribe of Levi to serve God and to bless in God's name. All right, so it's something like, it is something specific to the Levites more generally. It can be derived by inference, and you can see this here. That's this word here, miklal, right, to generalize. From inference that the priestly benediction is not considered service, as the verse mentions service and the priestly benediction as distinct rituals. Meaning to say that the offerings, that song are interconnected, and that the priestly benediction is in addition to, but not part of that sacrificial service. Now, all of this for us is to ask the fundamental question: what is the core? What is the ikar? That was the question here. From where do we know that the ikar of the service is from the Torah? But asked a different way, how do we know what we're doing that we're doing the essential parts of it, right? If we ask ourselves a question, if I just go through the motions, did I really do it, right? If Bob, like you used your example, if I went to morning minyan and nobody sang a song, did I really do the core parts? Now, I'm not actually asking that question for morning minyan or Saturday services or whatever, Psuki de Zimra, whatever each community is different. But even for us to ask, what is the essential thing? What is the quality of the mitzvah that we are facing in any given moment? And in this case, the question was one of song. Here's the last part we're going to read together, and then we can sort of open it up for some discussion at the end. So Rav Matana said that the source for the requirement to accompany the temple offerings with song is derived from this verse in Deuteronomy. Because you did not serve the Lord your God with joyfulness and with goodness of heart. What is the service of God that is performed with joyfulness and goodness of heart? You must say, this is song. Right, so meaning to say, what do we know? How do we know that the temple offerings, that the requirement that they have to have song? Because in the verse it says, in a negative framing, right, basically, to serve your Lord God requires joyfulness and a goodness of heart, which, whoa, I think is a powerful verse, and especially in this context. The Gemara objects. I'm halfway through the paragraph now. But you can say that this service is studying the words of Torah. As it is written, the precepts of the Lord are upright, rejoicing the heart, from Psalms. Meaning to say, the study of words of Torah is equally as good. The Gemara explains, Torah is indeed called a matter that rejoices the heart, but it is not called goodness. Whoa. Now, I don't want to sort of get down, again, as it sort of peters out. It asks the question now, and we're going to sort of just skim it. What are the other things that bring goodness and rejoices the heart? So here we have one where it says it's the bringing of the first fruits. Bringing the first fruits is called goodness, but it's not called goodness of heart. Again, like really tight language. Rav Matana then sort of goes into this question of where do we know that the bringing the first fruits requires song to go with it, right? So first fruits is the one of the offerings we give at Shavuot. It's just a few weeks ago. How do we know that that offering required song? Well, it comes from this verse, and in this context where we have a verse that says goodness of heart and rejoicing in goodness, and because it uses goodness in one place and goodness in another, therefore we can apply one to the other. And then it sort of continues this question of like, well, what about wine, right? Wine gladdens, it says here in Judges. And the vine replied, should I leave my wine, which gladdens God and man, God in person, and go and wave above the trees? Meaning to say, what about wine? We often say there's no celebration in Judaism without meat and wine. That's what the Gemara says elsewhere. And then it asks this interesting question. If it is clear that wine gladdens people, in what way does it gladden God? Which is a really fascinating question. Rather, derive from here that songs of praise in the temple are recited only over the wine of libation, and it is the song that gladdens God. Meaning to say, not only sprinkling, not only song, but wine is also a part of the essential part of the ritual practice. And it is the song which gladdens God if wine gladdens people. Now, I'm not suggesting that everybody should go like have their daytime glass of wine. That might be the wrong lesson to take away from it. But I do think it is interesting to ask the question about what is it that is essential? What is it that we're trying to accomplish? What is the role of song? Is it required? Is it doing something more than just being a checkbox? Arguably, it's doing something really, really core, really essential here. And then asking ourselves, is that true for me? If it is true for me, how am I crafting moments of life full of song? Some of my most wonderful memories of rabbinical school, in particular, are sitting at the table on a Shabbos meal, singing Zmirot, singing songs. That's not in a service context, certainly gladdened my heart, some of my best memories. And so I bring this text, not because I think we need to learn something specific about the temple practices, but to ask ourselves this question: what is the essential quality of a mitzvah? What role is joy in that mitzvah? And third, how can song be a part of that? And so that's those are the big questions that I'm asking. I'd love to hear what people think. Yeah, Bob?
My musical capabilities are limited, but through high school, I was a trumpet player, and I like my music brassy and loud. And I would love it to be in the service.
When I was in rabbinical school, one of my classmates is a jazz trumpet player whose grandfather was a taxi driving New York trumpet player. And he would bring it, not every time, but every once in a while for Hallel on Rosh Chodesh. And during services, he would play trumpet during services. And I resonate deeply with what you've described, because it was a powerful, brassy, loud experience, and certainly glad to my heart. So there's some real truth to that. Yeah, thanks for sharing. Yeah,
We talk about song, but we don't talk about what the words of the song are. So are they supposed to be songs of praise, or songs, or just general singing, or drunken singing? I mean, who knows?
I think pretty confidently we can say it's probably not drunken singing.
It's not the drunken singing, but if you have to have the wine to do the singing, maybe it is drunken singing.
Fair enough. I think you asked a good question, which is every song made equal in terms of its role in the temple and for us, and to have not just a joyous but spiritual experience. And I think certainly in the temple, my guess is that they are prescribed songs, but I don't know that we have those prescriptions. Karen, you were going to say?
Yeah, I grew up in at Sharet Tzedek in Detroit, which is a big shul with a fancy cantor, Chazan, who would stand in the front and sing, and everybody would kind of listen. And then as a young adult, I went to Jerusalem and I discovered Shira Chadashah, which is more of, I think, what all the shuls are doing now, where everybody was singing. And the difference in the experience is I can't even put it in words. You're part of what's going on. You're feeling the prayer. I hope that's what they're getting to in that whole Mishnah. That's the kind of song I think they're.
Yeah, so it's interesting, right? So a couple of things. One is, it's certainly, there was for a time, it was very in vogue to have high chazanut, like real performative singing that sort of transported us. I think of Kol Nidre, again, using that as an example, is one of those moments where, yes, we can all sing it, but hearing a single voice in a large room, it's like deeply powerful, right? So I do think there was a time where that was the epitome of song in synagogue. And I also agree with you that the collective, where we're all singing together is much more in vogue today than it was maybe 30 or 50 years ago. And Shira Chadashah in Jerusalem, as an example, I think it's true in many, many places. But I think it's certainly one example where the expectation is not that one person is singing, but that the leader, quote unquote, is really just getting us started collectively. But in both cases, song is still transformative. And I think that's an important lesson for us. And I don't think there's a better or worse. I think there's a different aesthetic, but in both cases, song certainly plays a role. Shira and/or Eric, anything you'd like to add?
Unmute.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have to pipe in now, so to speak. 50 years ago at Heights Temple, where I grew up, this congregation, the 8 o'clock Friday night service, it was very much performative, but it was very, very uplifting, I guess, for a 9-year-old me. And that basically gave me a lot of, I have good memories of that. And that's big reason why I'm sitting, well, I'm here right now doing what I'm doing. But I know that things are much different now. There's a lot of collective song efforts out there. And actually, even now, with Ken Rosenbaum here now, and certainly this weekend, we're going to hear more of that. It's a different world now, and I think we're all getting a lot out of it. So it's 50 years ago to now are two different worlds. But certainly what happened 50 years ago for me was very, very inspiring. So I just want to put that out there, especially in the context of this congregation.
Yeah, I mean, I would just, right. I don't think it's an either or, right? It's more likely a both and, which is that there are things that speak to us in moments and in times and in places and in contexts that may hit us differently or hit us in new ways. So yes, it's again not a better or worse, just different. Ron, I'm going to give you the last word, and then probably nap time.
I'm going to do my heretic thing for a change. I'm getting out of this that the song should be performed, or whatever verb you want to use, by a Levite. The Shaliach Tzibur should be a Levite, number one. And number two, anybody who's not a Levite should keep their mouths shut. It adds nothing to the service.
I think that there is
The lines.
that there is a very, very literal reading that might take you there. But I don't think that, first of all, I don't think that's how the halacha goes in the laws of shlichei tzibur. They certainly don't say that, although they do say that someone should have a pleasant voice. And as I like to say to my wife, I like all the pitches. I don't want to just sing in one pitch. I want all the pitches. I wouldn't say I have the strongest musical talent myself, but certainly the requirement of Levites only does not survive. But I do think that there is a hyper literal reading where that would be the case. So I'm gonna end this on the following, which is that I think what this text tells us, again referencing this week's parsha, is that the aesthetic, the essentiality, the essentialism of music in our ritual experiences, whether they be prayer or sacrifices or something else, first of all, contains a joyous element. That a joy is a part of the puzzle. I was recently talking to a colleague. We were walking through the neighborhood, and she was telling me that her Torah is all about joy. That was like an essential part of her Torah, and I've been thinking about it all week. And then I saw this text. I was like, oh, amazing. And then second, that it shows up in lots of different ways, right? We talked about it here in various circumstances, but it also shows up lots of ways in the text as well. And so I invite you to explore how song and joy speak to you. Maybe you'll sing a zemer, some zmirot on Shabbat, or go to services and sing there, or you'll just sing to yourself like I do. And I hope all of you have a wonderful Shabbat.